So, if you weren't already aware, your attachment style is one of the number one single most important ingredients that will determine whether or not your relationships are likely to be successful. And I don't necessarily mean success as being defined by if a relationship stays, you stay together for the long run, clock in many years together. I actually mean success where you are enjoying the relationship. Not only does the relationship last for years and years, but the relationship is full of growth and connection and enjoying one another's company and the ability to work through conflicts. And the way I like to think of our attachment style in general is basically the subconscious set of rules you learn to relate to others, to love others, to connect with others. And so if you imagine that you are sitting down to play a board game, and let's say that board game is Monopoly, and you have the rules for Monopoly and somebody else has the rules for Scrabble, because you have different rules for how to play the game, there's going to be a lot of unnecessary friction. And under that same umbrella, or using that same analogy, if you have a subconscious set of rules that's different from somebody that you're really close to and you're playing the game of love and romance with, you're going to also see a lot of unnecessary friction and problems and complications. So, in this video specifically, I am going to help you understand how to first identify your attachment style specific to the anxious preoccupied attachment style. And we're going to talk about the top 10 features that are most common in all anxious preoccupied styles and really give you the opportunity to know that, okay, this is me. I am the anxious preoccupied if you think that you might be. And I'll also tell you some steps that you can take to really start working on your attachment style because unlike a lot of different features in psychology, your attachment style is completely able to change. It's not like an official diagnosis. It's essentially a grouping of attachment symptoms that you can actually recondition at the subconscious level fairly easily. So let's start the signs. So, very first sign is that you have a huge fear of abandonment in relationships. And you may find that this spans many different relationships. You may find that this is also fear of abandonment in friendships or somebody pulling away. But you will find most so that it really is specific in romantic relationships. This is where it will tend to show up the most. Sign number two, you might find yourself deriving a lot of your identity from relationships in general. So you might find that the vast majority of your personality and how you feel about yourself from a self esteem perspective is very much intertwined with if your relationships are going well, if you're in a good relationship, if you feel like the people you are in relationships with, be it your friend group, be it your romantic partner, even your family members, if you feel like you're on good terms with them, if you feel like you have their connection, if those relationships are going strong, you will feel like that really drives your emotional state. You drive your emotional state and sense of self through there. And if they're not going well, it can really feel like the world is crumbling. Number three, you may find yourself feeling very unsafe and panicked if somebody's pulling away in the relationship. So you'll notice that you don't just have this discomfort, like, oh, it's too bad, we're sort of going through a rough patch, or the person's pulling away. But if you pay close attention, you are completely upregulated, a sense of panic, fear, like coursing through your body. And that's actually a trauma response that we talk about in many other videos on this channel, but it's actually a subconscious strategy from your body to put you into high gear so you can solve the problem, because anxious preoccupied attachment styles, they've actually confused and intertwined their survival with approval and closeness from others. And it's largely because when they grow up and there's this inconsistency in their childhood, where maybe one parent's really warm and the other parent's not as warm, or there's a lot of connection, but then both parents work a lot. That inconsistency creates perceived abandonment. And there can be real abandonment that, of course, creates anxious preoccupied attachment style as well. But as a general rule, because of this type of inconsistency, it programs you as a child to think, well, if I'm abandoned, how am I going to survive on my own? I can't, because I'm completely dependent. Children inherently know that they can't go out and get a job and start paying their bills at 4 years old, right? And we actually develop our original attachment style even earlier than that. But there's this dynamic of interlocking survival with approval, with connection. So you'll find that there's this actual panic-stricken state if somebody's pulling away from you in a relationship, and this big core wound being triggered of I am unsafe. Our next major symptom is you may find yourself really hypervigilant about somebody pulling away, like really noticing shifts in patterns, changes in the dynamic, very sensitive to if somebody's texting a little bit less than usual, very sensitive to time spent between texts, waiting, very sensitive to how much time you're spending together, and generally those changes in patterns rather than representing to you the natural ebbs and flows of relationships, which they are usually reflecting. But for you, the interpretation of that event will be, oh my gosh, the relationship's ending, something's changing, this isn't working. And it can really induce that panic stricken state again. Our next major symptom is finding yourself really valuing approval and acceptance and being highly sensitive to rejection. So if somebody pushes you away, and this can really take place in your friend group. This can take place at work. This can take place, especially with a boss. I generally see anxious, preoccupied attachment styles sort of have this subconscious relationship where their subconscious mind almost projects the relationship to their parents onto their boss to a small degree, if we're just being really honest, where it's almost like you're seeking that boss's approval or mentorship or connection in a similar way you would an authority figure in your childhood, like your caregivers. There can be this sort of mirroring of that relationship and a lot of sort of neediness there to a certain degree. And again, like when I say these things about neediness or clinging on or things like that, these are trauma responses. These are not like weaknesses, as a lot of anxious preoccupieds will judge themselves for. These are simply trauma responses in your subconscious mind resorting to tendencies to try to stay safe. And some of them are very adaptive and strong, and some of them have maladaptive side effects, right? Some of them can actually push people away more, even though we don't mean to. So, really important to pay attention to that. The next really big sign is a sense of sensitivity to exclusion. Nobody likes to be excluded, but anxious, preoccupied individuals have a huge I am excluded core wound where even if like two of their friends hang out without them, even if they have a friend group of like 8 or 9 people, they can feel really sensitive to that. Or if they have a partner who goes away with their friends, let's say it's a female dating a male, and let's say the guy goes away for the weekend with his friends to a cottage or something, that anxious, preoccupied woman may have really big core wounds and sensitivities triggered, even though logically, consciously, they know, well, I wasn't going to be the only person invited with a group of guys on their guys' weekend. But, there can still be this really intense discomfort around that experience. Our next major symptom, we have 4 more. Our next major symptom, number 7, is that you may struggle to really know your needs. And a lot of anxious, preoccupied, I can't stress how important it is to become securely attached. You have to learn your needs, not only so you can build out a relationship to yourself and understand yourself more, but also so that you can then proceed to communicate what you need from relationships to others. APs are generally not communicating their needs to others in relationships, which leaves them feeling unseen and unheard and emotionally disconnected and hurt. Because if somebody doesn't know your needs, they're less likely to meet them. And if you're trying so hard to meet your partner's needs and then they forget about yours, sometimes a big portion of those needs being forgotten about are that you weren't communicating them in the first place. And as much as it would be so nice if people were great at mind reading all the time, um, it's not something that is a healthy expectation to carry into relationships. So it's a huge empowerment and growth feature to get out of that mindset. Also, if you want to check out a course for free for 7 days, you can check out our anxious, preoccupied reprogramming course that is all about how to change your attachment style, and our needs course, which is all about how to learn your needs, know your needs, communicate your needs to others, receive your needs. Because also anxious preoccupied, even if they start communicating, sometimes are afraid to receive because they'll be afraid that they'll be a burden, or that they'll be disliked, or they'll be too much for asking for their needs. And those are actually maladaptive beliefs that we've collected, and that need to be reconditioned, because it's really healthy to communicate and exchange needs. And honestly, without that part, we can't even have a securely attached relationship. So it's such an important part of healing and changing your attachment style to become secure. Anyways, I'll put the link below for that, but you can check it out for free for 7 days. And each course is like 2 hours. It's pretty straightforward. There's a workbook, and it gives you access to our whole platform. So you can come and ask me questions on the webinars, all that stuff too. Number 8, is anxious preoccupieds are usually afraid to set boundaries and also don't tend to know what their boundaries are, like what healthy boundaries are. And they'll fear setting them again for the same reason they fear communicating their needs, which is if I say no to somebody, I'm not comfortable doing that, or I don't want to do that, or hey, I'd rather do this instead. Um, Anxious preoccupieds are usually assuming that that will get them rejected, that will get them abandoned or alone or unsafe, or all these other core wounds that their subconscious mind is carrying. Our next one is that you may find yourself in a position where whenever somebody there's an argument, there's a disagreement, where other attachment cells may actually take a step back and need time to process. You may find yourself instead constantly moving towards somebody, constantly getting into a position where you are trying to maintain proximity. You are trying to, it's what we call activating strategies. It's like you're trying to just get closer to the person so that you can mitigate the potential for abandonment taking place. And last but not least, anxious preoccupieds tend to people please a lot. And that can lead to resentment sometimes in relationships where you feel like it's all about the other person and you don't matter or you're not important. But sometimes, again, carving out that healing to not have to feel like that also includes allowing yourself to take up space, allowing yourself to be okay with having needs and communicating them and getting them met and sharing. So these are the most common signs. There's lots of other dynamics to dive into. And these are all things that can be changed, can be relearned, can be reconditioned, reprogrammed using specific subconscious tools. We have a lot of that on this channel. We have a lot of that inside the personal development school in our courses. So I encourage you to check out what's free in there, and also to learn as much as you can, because healing this style usually is what helps people go from feeling like they go in relationship after relationship and they're showing up and they're trying their hardest and then they feel let down. And often too, they may find themselves attracting emotionally unavailable people a lot of the time. And then feeling let down or disappointed by relationships and finding like, why can't I just get a relationship that lasts? A lot of it has to do with your attachment triggers and trauma behaviors that come from this attachment style that were not your fault to begin with, right? Being afraid of abandonment because of different childhood programs that you acquired. Like that's not your fault. But until you change it and take responsibility, it will continue to plague your relationships to a certain degree and make relationships hard and uncomfortable instead of stable and consistent and a safe space to rest where you can really open up and be yourself and share your needs and get them met. And that's what we should be looking for from relationships as a whole. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for sharing, for any comments you have below, anything like that. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to this channel and hit the thumbs up button if you got a lot of value from this video.